G'day. In the previous video, we talked about PTSD triggers. And then now you've got the theoretical component. I wanted to take you through my own situation on the activity sheets. So then that way, in the next activity, you can go and apply it to your own situation. I'm going to share a quick story with you with one of the events that happened to me. I call it the trauma triangle. In my second tour of Afghanistan, there were 3 severely traumatic experiences that happened in succession, and they were all IED related, or improvised explosive device related. The first one was where Sergeant Brett Till lost his life, paid the ultimate sacrifice while he was disarming a whole cluster of IED bombs that had been laid out along a major route. That was very, very traumatic, and I'm not going to be going into details of what happened afterwards, but that was the first traumatic incident. The second traumatic incident was when our call sign, we were traveling in a Bushmaster armored vehicle and we ran over a 20 kilogram IED, which blew the engine out of the vehicle as well as the wheels, and the people that were inside, it caused mass casualties. I was lucky in a sense where I didn't get any traumatic brain injuries. However, I carried some other mental scars and physical scars as I was standing in the turret manning the rear gun at the time. And then the third incident was when Private Damien Tomlinson ran over an IED, or his call sign did, and he lost his legs. I'd like to quickly acknowledge that the actions on and what happened afterwards by the amazing people that we worked with, the soldiers at top of their game and the leadership, were just second to none. I just want to acknowledge that. However, that's outside the scope of what we're talking about. And we're talking about the SUDS, and I can feel it now, so I'm just going to take a moment to gain composure, so then we could go through this exercise in identifying triggers. Now that I've shared that little bit of the story with you and some of the trauma that I experienced that were a contributing factor to my own PTSD, let's go through identifying triggers that might happen in public spaces. The first thing we talked about in the explainer of the ID triggers was some things like sights, sounds, and smells. For me, an example, if there was a smell that would trigger me based on that incident, would be the smell of cordite or gunpowder. What could I smell at the time if I cast my mind back to that particular situation? 2 things was extreme. By this stage in the tour, we'd already not showered for a few days, and this was the part of a month-long tour where we really didn't have a chance to shower. So imagine it at the end of the tour. But extreme BO at the time of the incident when we ran over that roadside bomb was one thing, right? 6 blokes in a vehicle, sometimes that could trigger me off. And the next thing was the smell of a ration pack. In particular, it was the dehydrated beef, okay? 3 things, there's a few more, but these are one of the things that I want you to be able to do in your own context. Let's go to sounds now. When the ID went off, I distinctly heard a sound of a right? Sound. Let's call that the clicking type sound. That's something that triggered me off afterwards. That was something that I heard during that incident that I can associate with that happens now. As with our other example, sudden loud bangs, like the backfiring of a car or a jackhammer going off on the freeway. Near where I live at the moment, there's a lot of roadworks. One time the traffic was banked up and there was a big smashing machine like a big jackhammer, and it went off right next to my ear, and I jumped, and it was it was quite a triggering experience for me. Little things like that. Clicking, sudden loud banging. Another one might be, this is a big one, in crowded spots, is the excessive noise, or excessive noise that bounces around. All right, an example of that would be in a shop. The worst one is in swimming pools, and I take my kids to swimming and there's no sound protection. It is bouncing around everywhere. In a loud stadium where there's so much sounds and people are trying to talk to me and there's big music. Crowded restaurants, lots of people talking, over loud music, and I'm a DJ. It's really hard. Sometimes those things can be triggering. 3 things. Clicking, sudden loud banging, excessive noise. Before we go into the sites, I wanted to preface, there could be a whole number of triggers you can be exposed to, but over time, there might be things that change. You might get used to managing one trigger or another, but something else might come in and do that. That's perfectly fine. So what we're doing during this exercise is trying to outline them all. I'm giving you a couple of examples here. So if you cast your mind to the incident, but they can change over time, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. We're just identifying what triggers you, especially if we're going out into those public spaces. This one here, the sights, what gets my goat now sometimes is when I see situations out of my control. An example would be sometimes I might see something that's out of control and then I just don't have any power to do anything. So it's like sight and observe. And I'd sort of link that back to when I was in Afghanistan and we'd be doing an OP and then we'd see the women and children coming out, and usually the activity that would happen afterward that would get into a kinetic activity or would be in a heavy gun battle. Stuff that was out of my control. The association was with seeing situations out of control. And then something for me, and then you see this with a lot of Vietnam veterans as well, is sometimes, and this is not being racist in any way, but sometimes it might be the cultural differences, is that sometimes people associate people of a different ethnic background and it takes them back to that situation. And in the case here, something that I might see is someone of Middle Eastern origin treating a woman in a certain way. That can sometimes trigger me. It doesn't trigger me anymore. Back in the day, it did, because I saw their culture over there is much different to how we are in the Western culture in Australia. And I'm not, please, I want to make sure that you know that this is not inciting any hate or anything like that. I'm just outlining what was a trigger for me at the time so I could be cognizant, I could be aware, and I could be mindful. All right, so these are 3 triggers. Let's just go with these. See situations out of my control. What is it that happens and how do I tie it in now? As I mentioned before, if there's something that I can't control, big, large crowds, see that there might be an accident or something like that. Sometimes that's been triggering for me, especially in public settings. Another one is the clicking sounds. Clicking sounds of something's chick, right? Reminded me of the bomb going off. Sudden loud bangs, same again, like that big jackhammer on the freeway that was drilling in the pole. Excessive noise, like things like crowded areas, being in the shops, and then also, things like the pool, right, where I can't have control. Restaurants when the music's too loud and there's so many people. And then we'll talk about that a little bit later on in our little bonus section. And the last one, the smell of cordite and gunpowder. Back in the early days for me, the smell of the cordite and gunpowder would just really bring me back to the incident. So I really couldn't smell, like even a cap gun was something that would get me off, would set me off. Extreme BO, and then the ration pack and the dehydrated beef. These ones here with the smells aren't as much triggers for me now that I've got the tools to be able to do this in the Soldiers 5, the Trigger Tamer Toolkit, and the Trigger Mastery Method. But these things here have always been things like in the exercise that you'll be doing that may trigger you. So you could put it in, if you're a first responder, is the smell of a burning body in a car maybe. If you're a paramedic, you might smell alcohol on a patient that passed away, or all of these many different things that you might be able to contextualize to your own situation. This is how we're going to fill this out on the sheet of paper, on the identifying your triggers sheet of paper. And then lastly, in this video, let's talk about where this manifests in the body. So for me, it manifests as sometimes tight jaw. Oops, sorry about my writing, but you can see that. Tight jaw, holding breath, which leads to anxiety, overwhelm. Holding the breath's a big one. We'll be working on that in the next module. And you also did that in the Trigger Mastery Method. Sweaty palms in some situations as well. And then the last one, so that you could get on by doing your own, was carrying stress in the midsection, in the stomach, and then also in the lower back, where my lower back, that'd get all tight. And then here would get all tight as well. I've got injuries in the shoulders. So all those little bits might hurt. And the last one was that sometimes it also manifests in the legs or my joints where I was injured when I felt I was getting my PTSD symptoms were coming up. There you have it. I've given you an example by guiding you through what triggers me and then also where in the body it manifests for me and the situations. I want you now to go and apply that to the sheet, identifying your triggers, and then where does the trauma manifest in my body and what happens. And I'll see you in the next video.